My 7-year-old sister blew her $180K inheritance in 6 months, then sued me to steal mine by lying in court. But the judge discovered the truth, and what happened next left everyone speechless. I'm 17 years old. I'm finishing my last year of high school, and I need to tell this story because basically my older sister tried to steal my inheritance after she spent all of hers on stupid stuff. And the worst part is, she almost succeeded. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand the type of person Samantha is. Because this story doesn't just start with my dad's death, but with years and years of her being, well, her. Samantha is 27 years old, so she's exactly 10 years older than me. And for as long as I can remember, she's always been controlling and manipulative. You know, the type of person who has to have everything her way, or she throws an incredible tantrum. When I was a kid, like 7 or 8 years old, she was already in college and would only come home when she needed money or wanted to show off something, and my dad would always fall for it because, I don't know, I guess parents have that soft spot for their kids, right? The thing is that Samantha never got, along with Aunt Dorothy, my dad's sister. And that's important for the story because Aunt Dorothy was basically like a second mom to me after my mom left us when I was like 5 years old. Samantha hated that Aunt Dorothy had so much influence in the family. She said she was nosy and always wanted to control everything. But the truth is that Aunt Dorothy was just trying to help, especially after my mom left and my dad had to raise us practically alone. My dad worked in construction, nothing fancy or anything, but he always gave us what we needed and even saved up a bit to leave us something when he was gone. Though honestly, I never thought that moment would come so soon. Everything started to change when I was in my junior year of high school. My dad started having heart problems, nothing too serious at first, but his doctor told him he had to take better care of himself and take medications and all that stuff. I got pretty scared because I had already lost my mom, not physically, but emotionally, and the idea of losing my dad was, I don't know, too much for me. Aunt Dorothy noticed that I was stressed and that my dad needed help, so she started coming over more often, like 3 or 4 times a week, to help him with medical appointments and make sure he took his medicines and ate well. And Samantha? Well, she lived like 2 hours away with her husband Timothy, and we'd text her all the time to keep her updated on how Dad was doing, but she almost never responded, and when she did it was like, okay, keep me informed, as if it were a weather report or something, without any real emotion. Timothy, her husband, is another topic altogether. That guy is so arrogant you can't even talk to him without him making you feel inferior. And on top of that, he has some chronic illness. I never knew exactly what, but Samantha always used it as an excuse for everything. Like, I can't come because Timothy feels bad. I can't help because Timothy needs me, and so on with everything. Things got really bad in March of my senior year. I remember the exact date because it was the day after my 17th birthday. I was at school when I got a call from Aunt Dorothy, and her voice sounded weird, like forced. And she told me I had to go to the hospital because Dad had collapsed at work, and they'd taken him by ambulance. I ran out of school, didn't even tell anyone, just grabbed my stuff and left. And when I got to the hospital, Dad was in the emergency room, and the doctors were saying things about arrhythmia and heart failure and a bunch of medical terms I didn't fully understand, but knew were bad. Aunt Dorothy was there with me, holding my hand while we waited for news, and I sent like 5 messages to Samantha telling her to come to the hospital, that it was urgent, that Dad was in bad shape. But guess what? She didn't show up. Not that day, not the next day, not the following week. Literally 2 full weeks passed before she even called, and when she finally did, it wasn't to ask how Dad was, but to complain that nobody had given her enough details about his condition, as if we hadn't tried to contact her 1,000 times. Dad was in the hospital for almost a month, and during that time, Aunt Dorothy practically moved into our house to take care of everything, while I went to school and tried to maintain some normalcy in my life. Though, honestly, I don't know how I managed it because my head was somewhere else the whole time. The doctors said Dad could recover if he followed treatment and made lifestyle changes. And for a moment, I thought maybe everything was going to be okay. You know, that we'd have more time together. But things didn't work out that way. In May, like at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, I got a call from Aunt Dorothy that woke me up, and just from the tone of her voice, I knew something terrible had happened. Dad had had another attack, but this time it was different. It was worse, and when we got to the hospital, it was already too late. The doctors said his heart just couldn't take it anymore. And just like that, my dad was gone, at only 49 years old, leaving me about to graduate high school with a bunch of plans and dreams he'd shared with me about going to college and studying medicine and having a better life than the one he had. I was there with Aunt Dorothy when it happened, holding Dad's hand while the doctors turned off the machines and left us alone with him, and it was the most horrible moment of my life up to that point, you know? Because it's one thing to know someone is sick, and quite another to see your father there, lifeless, and realize you're never going to be able to talk to him again, or hug him, or ask him for advice. Aunt Dorothy called Samantha immediately, but Samantha didn't answer the phone, so she left her a voicemail saying that Dad had passed away and to please call as soon as possible. How long do you think it took her to respond? 6 hours. 6 full hours after her father died. She finally called us back, and when she did, she wasn't crying or seemed devastated or anything. She just said, "Oh no, when is the funeral? I need to make arrangements." As if she were planning a work trip or something. The funeral was a week later, and Samantha didn't even show up. She sent a message the day before saying Timothy was too sick to travel, and she couldn't leave him alone. And I just stood there looking at my phone thinking, really? Your father just died and you can't come to the funeral because your husband has a cold or whatever he has? But well, that's Samantha. She's always been like that. Everything is always about her and her needs and her problems, and the rest of us just don't matter. The funeral was small, just Aunt Dorothy, some of Dad's friends from work, a couple of neighbors, and me, and I felt so alone standing there, looking at my father's casket, knowing my sister didn't even bother to come say goodbye to him. A week after the funeral, we had the will reading at Dad's lawyer's office. Mr. Hughes, an older guy like 60 years old, who had known my dad for years and was always very professional and serious. Samantha did come to that meeting. Interesting, right? She couldn't go to the funeral, but for the will reading there, she was sitting with her expensive clothes and her jewelry, and that superiority face she always puts on when she wants to intimidate someone. Mr. Hughes started reading the will, and basically Dad had divided everything 50/50 between Samantha and me, his house, his savings, his life insurance, everything divided equally, but with one important condition for my part. Aunt Dorothy would be the custodian of my inheritance until I turned 18, because legally, I was still a minor. My share was like $180,000 in total, adding everything up, and Samantha's was exactly the same, a decent amount that Dad had saved working hard his whole life, plus the insurance money. When Mr. Hughes finished reading, Samantha had this weird expression on her face, like annoyed but trying to hide it. And Aunt Dorothy looked calm, but I knew she was preparing for some drama because she knew Samantha as well as I did. We left the office and Samantha didn't even talk to me, just went straight to her car without saying goodbye or anything, and I thought, well, at least it's over and everyone has their share and we can move on with our lives. How naive I was. Seriously. Like 2 weeks later, Samantha started calling me, and at first her calls were like casual, asking how I was doing, how school was going, if I needed anything. And I thought that maybe she was finally acting like a real older sister, you know, that Dad's death had made her reflect or something. But then her calls got weirder. She started asking me about my inheritance, if I already knew what I was going to use it for, if I had talked to Aunt Dorothy about the money, and I'd tell her I hadn't thought much about it yet, because it had only been a month since Dad died, and I was more focused on graduating and processing everything that had happened. Then one day she called me and straight up told me that Timothy needed expensive surgery, something related to his chronic condition, and that their insurance didn't fully cover it, and they needed like $50,000 extra. And she asked if I could lend or rather give her part of my inheritance to help them. I was completely shocked. I mean, was she really asking for my inheritance barely a month after Dad died? I told her I'd have to talk to Aunt Dorothy because she was the custodian, and I couldn't just give her the money like that. And Samantha got furious, started telling me I was selfish, that family helps each other, that Timothy was really sick, and if I didn't help him and something bad happened, it would be my fault. I hung up the phone, shaking because she'd never yelled at me like that, and I went to Aunt Dorothy to tell her everything. Aunt Dorothy didn't seem surprised at all, just shook her head and said, I knew something like this was going to happen. and she explained that legally we couldn't give her the money without a court order, and besides, she didn't trust that Samantha was really going to use it for Timothy's surgery. Turns out Aunt Dorothy was right not to trust, because like a month later we found out by chance, through a cousin, that Samantha had bought herself a new car, like a Mercedes or something, and that she and Timothy had gone on vacation to Europe for 2 weeks. So how is it that they urgently needed money for surgery if they were spending thousands of dollars on luxuries? It didn't make any sense. But that's Samantha. Everything with her is lie after lie after lie. When I confronted her on the phone about the car and the vacation, she told me it wasn't my business how she spent her money and that they still needed help for Timothy anyway. And I just told her to stop calling me with her lies and hung up on her. But Samantha didn't give up there. Oh no, that would have been too easy. She started a full campaign to try to get my money, calling all the relatives we knew, aunts, uncles, cousins, even family friends, telling them her version of the story where she was the victim and Aunt Dorothy was a manipulator who was controlling me and using my inheritance for her own purposes. Some relatives called me asking if it was true, if Aunt Dorothy was treating me badly, or if I wanted to live with Samantha instead of with my aunt. And I had to explain to them over and over that nothing Samantha was saying was true, that Aunt Dorothy was just taking care of my money like Dad had wanted, and that I was perfectly happy living with her while I finished school. Things got to a completely ridiculous point when, like in October, Mr. Hughes called us to tell us that Samantha had filed a legal petition in court to remove Aunt Dorothy as custodian of my inheritance and for her to be named as my legal guardian and custodian of the money. The petition said a bunch of horrible things about Aunt Dorothy, accusing her of financial abuse, of manipulating me, of keeping me isolated from my family. Basically any lie she could think of to make Aunt Dorothy look bad in front of the judge. I was furious. Like I'd never been so angry in my life, because Samantha was literally trying to steal my inheritance using the legal system, and on top of that she was slandering the only person who had really taken care of me after Dad's death. We had to get a lawyer. Mr. Hughes recommended someone, and we started preparing for the court hearing. Aunt Dorothy was incredibly calm during the whole process, much calmer than me, and she'd tell me not to worry, that the truth would come out and that Samantha wasn't going to win this. But I was terrified, because it was my money, the money my dad worked so hard to leave me so I could go to college and have a good future, and the idea that Samantha could just take it away from me with her lies was, I don't know, a nightmare. The hearing was, like in January of this year, I was already 17 and a half at that point, and there were only a few months left until my 18th birthday. But legally, I was still a minor. The courtroom was full of people, not just us, but other cases too. And when it was finally our turn, my heart was beating so fast I thought I was going to pass out. Samantha's lawyer presented their case first, basically repeating all the lies she'd been saying, that Aunt Dorothy was controlling and manipulative, that I was being influenced against my sister, that Samantha only wanted what was best for me and to protect my inheritance, blah blah blah. I wanted to scream right there that it was all lies, but our lawyer had told me to wait my turn to speak. Then it was our lawyer's turn, and that's where everything started to fall apart for Samantha. Our lawyer presented bank records showing that Samantha had literally spent her entire inheritance in just 6 months, the full $180,000, on things like the Mercedes, the vacation to Europe, designer clothes, expensive jewelry, luxury furniture for her house, basically pure stupid stuff that wasn't necessary. He also presented evidence that Timothy had never needed any urgent surgery, that it had all been a lie to try to manipulate me. And our lawyer even had copies of the text messages and voicemails that Samantha had sent me where she threatened me and said horrible things if I didn't give her the money. Samantha's face when all that evidence was presented was, I don't know how to describe it, like a mixture of shock and panic and rage. And her lawyer looked completely bewildered, because obviously Samantha hadn't told him the truth about anything. The judge asked Samantha directly if it was true that she'd spent her entire inheritance in 6 months, and she tried to lie and say no, that she'd invested the money wisely, but our lawyer had the bank records right there, and there was no way to deny the truth. Then it was my turn to testify, and the judge asked me if I felt safe and well cared for with Aunt Dorothy, if she had ever mistreated or manipulated me, and I told him the truth, that Aunt Dorothy had been like a mother to me, that she'd never done anything bad to me, that she was only fulfilling my dad's wishes to protect my inheritance until I was an adult. I also told the judge about all the times Samantha had called harassing me for the money, about how she hadn't come to Dad's funeral, about how she'd lied about Timothy's surgery, about the whole defamation campaign she'd done against Aunt Dorothy. And while I was talking, I could see Samantha sitting there trying to maintain her composure, but she was obviously furious because her plan was falling apart before her eyes. The judge listened very carefully to everything, reviewed all the evidence, and then did something we didn't expect. He didn't just dismiss Samantha's petition immediately, but he also said he was going to investigate her for perjury and fraud because she had lied in legal documents and had tried to manipulate the court with false information. I sat there almost unable to believe what was happening. Like, did I really just win? Had Samantha really lost so completely? Aunt Dorothy hugged me, and I could feel she was crying. But they were tears of relief, and I started crying too, because all the stress from the last months was finally being released. Samantha stormed out of the courtroom, furious, didn't even look at me, just ran out with Timothy behind her, and that was the last time I saw her in person. The judge's investigation resulted in Samantha being found guilty of perjury. She had to pay a large fine, like $10,000 or something, and they also ordered her to do mandatory therapy for her manipulative behavior. Additionally, the judge put a temporary restraining order that prohibited her from contacting me or Aunt Dorothy directly for at least a year. And believe me, that restraining order was the best thing that could have happened, because we finally had peace. Now I'm almost 18 years old. I graduated high school last month with good grades, and I just received my acceptance letter to the university where I want to study medicine, just like my dad and I had planned. My inheritance is still intact, in Aunt Dorothy's custody, and in a few months when I turn 18, I'm going to have full access to it, and I'm going to use it exactly as Dad would have wanted, to pay for my college and build a good future for myself. I haven't heard anything from Samantha since the court hearing. Some relatives tell me that she and Timothy had financial problems because they spent everything so fast and now they're in debt. But honestly, I don't care. She made her bed, and now she has to sleep in it. Sometimes I think about everything that happened, and I wonder how someone can be so selfish and manipulative, especially with their own younger sibling who just lost their father. But I guess Samantha was always like that, and Dad's death just brought out her true nature. Aunt Dorothy tells me it's not worth holding a grudge, that Samantha probably has her own problems and demons we don't know about. But the truth is, I do hold a grudge. A lot. Because what she tried to do to me was unforgivable. She tried to steal the future my father wanted to give me. And for me, that's something I'm never going to forget or forgive. Last week, I was cleaning out some of Dad's stuff from his house that we still had stored, and I found a letter he'd written to me, but never gave me. I think he wrote it when he was in the hospital the first time. In the letter, he told me he was proud of me, that he knew I was going to do great things in life, and that the money he was leaving me was to make sure I had all the opportunities he never had. I cried reading that letter, and I realized that defending my inheritance wasn't just about the money, it was about protecting the last gift my father gave me and honoring his memory by doing something good with my life. And that's exactly what I'm going to do.